Good. Thanks, McKenna, for putting the programs together lately. Okay, now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Laura Newhart. Full Professor Laura Newhart is one of my colleagues in the Department of Philosophy and Religion at EKU, and she is talking to us today about civil discourse in fractious times, and then I spied her title, Logic-Based Therapy in Civil Discourse in Fractious Times, and I know that logic-based therapy is a kind of, what would you call it, kind of an applied philosophy or philosophical counseling, kind of, so philosophical concepts applied to problems of living, real people. Real life problems as opposed to philosophical problems, or the philosophical problems as they arise in ordinary life. And I know that she's used this notion, the logic-based therapy approach in some of the philosophy for children stuff. I know she designed a course around teaching ethics to first graders. It was very interesting. I got to see some of the materials for that. So I'm interested to hear how logic-based therapy can help us engage in civil discourse with each other. So let's welcome Laura Newhart.
Thank you. Is this okay? Can everybody hear me? Or should I? Down? Is that better? Okay. I don't want to get too close. I have a tendency to, cozy right up to it. So, thank you for having me today. I'm very happy to be here. This is my third time giving a talk at the UU. I was wondering if it's like Saturday Night Live. At the fifth time, do you get a jacket? But, no. But anyway, I'm very happy to be here today, and I'm talking about logic-based therapy and civil discourse in fractious times. And I thought that it would be a good topic for today, for sort of the anniversary of the inauguration last year, and it just seemed like a good time for this topic. I don't propose to have any answers, but I do have things hopefully that will help us think about civil discourse in a deeper way. So again, thank you for having me. I have 3 goals for this presentation. First, I'd like to introduce you to logic-based therapy, which as Matt said, is a form of philosophical counseling. I'd also like to explore the role that logic-based therapy might play in restoring public discourse in these fractious times. And 3, I'd like to consider the role that logic-based therapy can play in restoring public discourse through the lens of the theoretical framework that Jonathan Haidt puts forth in his book, The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. So, thank you. So there's no denying that our public discourse has become increasingly uncivil, antagonistic, and detrimental to healthy, pleasant, and productive human relations. And it stands to reason that our behavior would become increasingly destructive and violent as our ability to engage in civil public discourse deteriorates. Just a glance at headlines from the past year makes this clear. The Washington Post on April 3rd, 2017, a headline read, "That unusual Trump incitement ruling wasn't just about one rally, but a multitude." Politico on July 13th, 2017, the headline reads, "Trump's outside attorney to apologize to man he sent profane emails." BuzzFeed, July 25th, 2017, "A man dumped a bottle of water on a Fox News host's head at a Brooklyn event." NBC News, June 14th, 2017, Representative DeSantis says shooting suspect asked if Republicans or Democrats on the field. More recently, from Fox News, December 21st, 2017, the headline is Obama advisor Ben Rhodes slammed for tweet joking about GOP leaders' obits. Ben Rhodes tweeted that a photo of Trump, Pence, Ryan, and McConnell with their thumbs up should be the accompanying photo when/if Trump is indicted. He then quickly added that it should also accompany the other three parties' obits. Whether he meant, their political obituaries or their actual obituaries, is sort of an issue for contention. Representative Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, who was seriously wounded in the shooting at a Republican congressional baseball practice in June, tweeted back, "You may want to reconsider your rhetoric." No, these are not quarrels on the third grade playground. These are the kinds of exchanges taking place at the highest levels of our government and among the general population. A recent study by Shanto Iyengar and his colleagues concludes that currently the level of partisan animus in the American public exceeds racial animus. Recently, there have also been news items touting the importance and value of civil discourse and providing tips on how to restore it. Justin Bariso explains, and 20 years ago, Steve Jobs demonstrated the perfect way to respond to an insult. Justin Bariso explains that when a man publicly insulted Jobs personally and questioned the effectiveness of the most recent Apple software, instead of returning the attack, Jobs first stops and thinks. Second, agrees with his accuser. Third, helps everyone to see the big picture. Fourth, uses his own vulnerability to his advantage. Fifth, praises his team. And sixth, finishes strong with a motivating, optimistic view of the future. Likewise, in the 7 Habits of Highly Depolarizing People, David Blankenhorn from the American Public Interest describes 7 mental habits that encourage political depolarization. These include 1, criticizing from within rather than from without, which assumes that the existence of shared terms and values. 2, looking for goods in conflict rather than seeing every situation in terms of good versus evil. 3, avoiding Manichaeism or binary thinking by counting beyond 2 in any given situation. 4, doubting one's own views. 5, specifying instead of generalizing whenever possible. 6, qualifying one's own views when necessary and appropriate rather than absolutizing them. And 7, keeping the conversation going, because when the conversation ends, the posturing, insults, and violence take over. These prescribed discursive techniques and mental habits for creating more civil public discourse bring to mind the resources provided by Elliot D. Cohen's logic-based therapy, especially the logic-based therapy guiding virtues of objectivity, authenticity, empathy, respect, and empowerment. So I just want to say a few, sort of give you an introduction to logic-based therapy here. The fundamental principle of logic-based therapy is that our emotions and behaviors are actually conclusions of the arguments that we use to justify them. Often the arguments that lead to unpleasant emotions or dysfunctional behaviors are fallacies or faulty arguments. A fallacy is an argument where the premises do not adequately support the conclusion, or one or more of the premises is false. According to logic-based therapy, the arguments that support our emotions and behaviors are what Aristotle calls practical syllogisms. A practical syllogism is an argument with 2 premises, one of which is a general rule prescribing a particular emotion or behavior in a particular situation. The second premise is a report that such a situation holds. The conclusion is then the emotion or the behavior that the rule prescribes in that situation. This is known as a practical syllogism because it possesses the standard form of the syllogism, that is a major premise, which is the rule, and a minor premise, which is the report, and a conclusion. And the conclusion is a practical outcome, that is an emotion or a behavior. So the general format is as follows. There's a rule, there's a report, therefore, and bingo, you've got the emotion, or the behavior. So an example would be, we can consider this example as an argument for anger, right? If someone gives me a mean look, then they are a total jerk, right? That's the rule. If this, then this. That person just gave me a mean look. Therefore, that person is a total jerk, and the resulting emotion is anger. So logic-based therapy tells us that if we drill down further in our analysis of the argument form of the practical syllogism, we find that the major premise, the rule, often takes the form of a conditional statement. If this, then this. Where the first part of the statement, the antecedent, contains the object of the prescribed emotion or behavior. The object is the mean look, the person who gave me the mean look. And the second part contains the rating of that object, an evaluation of that object. So in this example, the person giving the mean look is the object, and my rating of that person justifies my anger. Given the truth of the rule and the structure of the argument, if someone gives me a mean look, it automatically follows that I should get angry. However, and this is logic-based therapy's primary opportunity for intervention, it is always possible that one or more of the premises, the rule or the report, be false, right? Maybe everyone who gives me a mean look isn't a total jerk, right? Or maybe that person didn't really just give me a mean look. So it's always possible that one or more of the premises be false, and hence that the argument is faulty or a fallacy. According to logic-based therapy, the arguments that lead to unpleasant emotions or dysfunctional behavior, read human misery, are often fallacious. Okay, so moreover, they often take the form of the 11 cardinal fallacies identified by logic-based therapy, which are, as you can see, I know, I'm sorry about the smallness of the print.
All our old glasses.
No. I know. But I can read to you the 11 fallacies are dutiful worrying, demanding perfection, damnation of self, others, life, or the universe, awfulizing, the world revolves around me thinking, oversimplifying reality, distorting probabilities, blind conjecture, constipation, that's what Elliot Cohen calls it, where it's like, if it's hard, I can't do it. I just can't. Constipation, bandwagon thinking, jumping on the bandwagon, if everyone else is thinking this way, then I should think this way too, or if everyone else is doing this, then I should do this too, in manipulation. So this argument, or the argument in the previous slide, is an example of damnation, right? If this person gives me a mean look, they're a total jerk. And the rule for damnation is basically if somebody does something that I don't like or that, I think is wrong, then they are totally useless, worthless, and should be damned, right? That's which Elliot Cohen wants to say is a fallacy. Is not true. So the goal of logic-based therapy is to identify these fallacies or faulty arguments and to correct them by refuting them, that is, showing how and where they're faulty, and replacing them with patterns of thought that lead to healthier emotions and more functional behaviors. Read human happiness is the goal. These more desirable patterns of thought often issue from the possession of certain virtues, and so logic-based therapy uses the theoretical content of philosophy to define and encourage the development of corresponding logic-based therapy guiding virtues. As you can see, the guiding virtue on this side. So this is a list of the fallacies, and these are the guiding virtues. So for example, respect is the corresponding guiding virtue for damnation. Logic-based therapy divides the 11 cardinal fallacies into fallacies of reporting, where the premise stating the empirical report is false. Maybe that person didn't just give me a mean look. And fallacies of rules, where the rules are false. The rule itself is false. Maybe everyone who gives me a mean look isn't a total jerk. Logic-based therapy also divides the fallacies of rules into emotional fallacies and behavioral fallacies. So as Cohen tells us in logic-based therapy and everyday emotions, generally speaking, the designation emotional signifies a fallacy that generates a destructive and self-defeating emotion, and behavioral signifies a fallacy leading to self-defeating action. It's also important to note that emotional reasoning interfaces with behavioral reasoning such that the conclusion of an emotional argument can become a premise in a behavioral argument and thus tend to lead to action. So this is an example from Cohen's logic-based therapy and everyday emotions, where we have, if Johnny ate the entire cake I bought, leaving none for me, then he's a selfish pig. Johnny ate the entire cake I bought, leaving none for me, therefore he's a selfish pig. If Johnny's a selfish pig, then I should tell him off. Johnny is a selfish pig, therefore I should tell him off. So we've got another example of damnation, right? He's a selfish pig, where the conclusion becomes the premise in the behavioral fallacy of manipulation or bullying, so to speak. So the logic-based therapy session consists of six simple steps. These steps, as Cohen says, these steps provide a rational framework for confronting problems of living. And the 6 steps are: 1, the logic-based therapy practitioner or consultant or what have you, should 1, identify the emotional and or behavioral reasoning that's going on with around whatever the issue is or the problem. 2, check for cardinal fallacies in the premises. 3, refute any cardinal fallacy. 4, identify the guiding virtue for each fallacy. 5, find an uplifting philosophy that promotes the guiding virtue. And 6, apply the philosophy by implementing a plan of action for the client. So thinking about how this might fit in with Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind. While the affinities between logic-based therapy and the discursive techniques and mental habits prescribed above for civil discourse seem clear on a more general surface level, it's important to dig deeper in order to uncover in more specific terms how logic-based therapy might be helpful in bridging our current political and social divisions and improving the civility of public discourse. In The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, social and moral psychologist Jonathan Haidt provides an empirical analysis of the different value commitments of the major political perspectives in the United States, including liberalism, libertarianism, and social conservatism. It is interesting and informative to consider in both general and specific terms how logic-based therapy as a curative intervention might fit into Haidt's methodological and theoretical framework. While there are significant and substantial differences between Haidt's approach and Cohen's approach and the content of their theories, there are also surprising and profound similarities. A comparison of the two can provide insight into ways that logic-based therapy might contribute to restoring civil public discourse in these fractious times. In spite of Haidt's empirical approach, his ultimate conclusion is that empathy, the ability to see things from the other person's perspective, and also the logic-based therapy guiding virtue corresponding to the fallacy of the world revolves around me thinking, Haidt claims empathy is the primary element necessary to overcome our current political polarization. However, Haidt claims that empathy is difficult to apply in moral and political disagreements. So this is a quote from Haidt: "Our righteous minds so readily shift into combat mode. Our reason and intuition work together smoothly to fend off attacks and lob rhetorical grenades of our own. The performance may impress our friends and show allies that we are committed members of the team, but no matter how good our logic, it's not going to change the minds of our opponents if they are in combat mode too. At first glance, it appears that the key logic-based therapy fallacies involved in polarizing and antagonistic public discourse in behavior include simplifying reality, especially in terms of us versus them, right? Bandwagon thinking, jumping, on, what my side thinks, I think, is kind of damnation and manipulation. Bandwagon thinking, the world revolves around me thinking, damnation and manipulation, including deception and bullying. And underlying all of these is a foundation that consists of demanding perfection. Hate's contribution of the metaphor of combat in the quote above sheds light on and firms up this first appraisal, as we can see from the following chain of reasoning, which sums up the emotional and behavioral reasoning of political polarization and which contains logic-based therapy cardinal fallacies at several points. So if someone disagrees with me, then we are in combat mode. If we are in combat mode, then it is a situation of us versus them. So, we got the simplifying reality, pigeonholing, it's us versus them. If it's a situation of us versus them, then we must strengthen and fortify our side, right? So we've got to jump out. We can't disagree with the people on our side. We can't, we do what they do. We show we're a member of the team, and we think like they think. So if it's a situation of us versus them, then we must strengthen and fortify our side, bandwagon thinking. If we must strengthen and fortify our side, then all that matters is protecting ourselves and making sure that we are, or at least perceived to be, right. And the logic-based therapy fallacy is the world revolves around me thinking, which is basically if I think something's wrong, then it is wrong, regardless of what anyone else might think. So if all that matters is protecting ourselves and making sure that we are or are perceived to be right, then the disagreeing other is worthless and a danger and should be damned. So the damnation. And if the disagreeing other is worthless and a danger and should be damned, then it doesn't matter how badly we treat them, which is, the logic-based therapy of manipulation, deception, and including deception and bullying. So back to thinking about how logic-based therapy fits into Hate's framework, the greatest obstacle to attempting to understand the role that logic-based therapy might play in restoring civil discourse through Hate's framework is that Hate downplays the role of reason in the process of choosing political and moral perspectives. In spite of the fact that reason plays a limited role in Hate's framework, in several places, there are also several openings where logic-based therapy could have an impact. So one of these places is with Hate's social intuitionist model. Beginning with Plato's story of the myth of Gyges' ring in the Republic, Hate claims that human nature more closely resembles Glaucon's account of justice than Socrates'. It will be recalled that in this part of the Republic, Glaucon and Socrates are debating about the value and the origin of justice. In order to show that most people see justice as the lesser of two evils, and that it only arose in order to keep people from the worst fate of suffering evil without the possibility of recompense, without the possibility of getting revenge or, making things right, Glaucon describes the ring of Gyges that was said to make its wearer invisible. Glaucon claims that, moral or not, anyone with this power to become invisible at will would do whatever he or she wanted, knowing that they would not be caught and punished. Thus, Glaucon claims that it's more important and more profitable for people to be thought to be just rather than to actually be just. Hate accepts this assessment as the correct account of human nature. Socrates, on the other hand, crafts an image of the soul which he believes shows the intrinsic value of justice. A just soul, for Socrates, is one where reason is in charge. In Socrates' image of the just soul, reason is represented by a man who keeps the unruly beasts, both wild and tame, of the appetites and the passions, under control and maintains harmony among them all. Without reason's rule, Socrates tells us the unjust soul is in a torturous state of internal war. This is not Hate's view of the human psyche. Hate compares reason to a rider and the intuitions, the appetites and the passions, to an elephant. The elephant, Hate tells us, is actually in control. The rider, or reason, plays a much more limited role than in Socrates' description. Reason, the rider, occasionally has some limited influence on the intuitions, the elephant, in determining the emotions, opinions, and behavior of the person. But reason's primary role is to serve as a public relations representative for the person. So remember, Hate claims it's more important for people to seem just than to actually be just. So reputation, including one's own self-concept, is all important. The elephant, the intuitions, make the decisions, and the rider, or reason, follows along behind, justifying and defending those decisions to others and to oneself. I'm right, I did this and I'm right, and here's why. As disheartening as Hate's view of the human psyche may be, it is clear that there is an opportunity for logic-based therapy to play a role here. Recall that logic-based therapy also begins with the claim that people use logical arguments to justify their emotions and behaviors. Unfortunately, as Hate's framework developed, the opportunity for logic-based therapy to play a role in restoring civil discourse narrowed even further, but it never completely disappears. Hate claims that he originally held the view that emotions give rise to moral judgments, and the moral judgments give rise to logical reasoning. So something happens, I'm all worked up about it, and it's morally wrong, and now I'm going to tell you why. It's sort of, so you get so he originally thought, we have emotions, then we form some kind of judgment, then we form a logical argument to defend those judgments. And then he thought that the logical reasoning would double back to check and influence the moral judgments. Okay, so now I've got my logical argument. Is that really right? Have I responded correctly? But as his work evolved, he began to think of emotions in a more inclusive and less cognitive sense as intuitions. And the role of reason became even more limited. Hate's developed view of the formation of moral judgments is this social intuitionist model. It's one where intuitions caused by a triggering event come first, and reasoning is usually produced after a judgment is made, primarily in order to influence other people. Hate refers to this as the social intuitionist model, which represents a socially dynamic and iterative process whereby, quote, as discussion progresses, the reasons given by other people sometimes change our intuitions and judgments. And this process repeats itself between the participants in the discussion. According to Hate, while it is possible for a person to change their own moral judgments through private reflection, it is relatively rare for most of us to change our mind about a moral issue without any prompting from someone else. So it's sort of, something happens, right? And then person A gets this intuition, feels bad about it or gets angry about it or whatever, forms a judgment, creates an argument to sort of defend that judgment, and then shares their judgment and their reasoning with B, somebody else, right? Then B gets these intuitions, gets their own intuitions, they form a judgment, they form their reasoning, and then they share their reasoning and their judgment back with A, and the cycle, continues. So in terms of logic-based therapy, if we think of the social intuitionist model in the context of a logic-based therapy session, the point of intervention for the logic-based therapy counselor or consultant would be where the logic-based therapy practitioner's reasoning and judgments impact and influence the client's original intuitions concerning the triggering event, and thus change the client's judgments and reasoning about that event. But this dynamic interactive process continues and works in both directions, such that the client's secondary judgments and reasoning, based on their intuitions concerning the logic-based therapy practitioner's intervention, will impact and influence the logic-based therapy practitioner's intuition, judgments, and reasoning. So this model also points out that it's important for logic-based therapy practitioners to be mindful of the influence of their own intuitions on their judgment and reasoning as the session progresses. Toward the end of The Righteous Mind, Haidt suggests that the way out of the morally and politically polarized condition of our public life is for psychologists, quote, to work with political scientists to identify changes that will indirectly undermine Manichaeism or binary thinking, this kind of, it's only this or this and no possible in between. Also known as the logic-based therapy cardinal fallacy of pigeonholing, as a form of simplifying reality. The logic-based therapy session is one such indirect approach. With its emphasis on the corresponding guiding virtue of objectivity, there is definitely a role for logic-based therapy to play here. The second way, and I think this is where it gets interesting if you're starting to sort of, doze off a little. The second way in which Haidt downplays the role of reasoning is in his the second way in which Haidt downplays the role of reasoning in his framework is through a reliance on a version of Darwin's theory of evolution. Haidt believes that the formation of our moral and political positions can be understood through a series of steps in both individual genetic and social cultural evolution. He's got that kind of unique sort of perspective on Darwin's theory of evolution. It was, he claims it was kicked out early on, and then he, thinks should be brought back in and is supported by Darwin. But according to Haidt, genetic evolution and cultural evolution work in tandem, and social groups as well as individuals are subject to the process of natural selection. Haidt identifies a number of evolved psychological mechanisms and social factors that he believes can allow us to track the formation of political identifications of individuals from their genetic makeup. Haidt provides the evolutionary background of many of these mechanisms and factors, especially those that allow and encourage individuals to form coherent, internally cooperative, but externally competing social groups in The Righteous Mind. However, here we're only going to focus on those which, in spite of their proposed evolutionary origins, allow opportunities for logic-based therapy to intervene in ways that contribute to the restoration of civil discourse. Among these evolutionary developments are what Haidt refers to as moral foundations. Haidt's moral foundations theory holds that there are at least 6 fundamental moral foundations that individuals and groups rely upon in making specific moral judgments as well as more general political identifications. These include 1, the care/harm foundation, 2, the liberty/oppression foundation, 3, fairness/cheating foundation, 4, loyalty/betrayal foundation, 5, authority/subversion, and 6, sanctity/degradation. Haidt claims that these moral foundations arose through evolutionary processes. So, for example, the care/harm foundation arose through the parental need to care for offspring. Haidt sees these moral foundations as universal cognitive modules upon which cultures construct moral matrices. The 6 moral foundations or modules work together to form the moral matrices of particular cultures. Each moral foundation moves between the 2 extremes that its label identifies, like care/harm, sanctity/degradation. So each foundation moves between the 2 extremes that its label identifies on the basis of certain triggers which activate that module. For example, the care/harm module was originally activated by suffering, distress, or neediness expressed by one's child. It's important to note, however, that these triggers are culturally variable and in fact malleable, so that today current triggers for the care/harm module might include baby seals or cute cartoon characters. Haidt claims that current triggers are, quote, the sorts of things that do in fact trigger the relevant modules, sometimes by mistake, for people in modern Western society. Different cultures will have different triggers, and Haidt claims that it is possible for the triggers to change in the course of a generation. While the triggers are culturally variable and malleable, Haidt insists that these moral foundations and their triggers are not relative or relativistic, but rather so much as they are pluralistic. Concerning logic-based therapy, it appears that the moral foundations or modules are analogous to the general rules of the major premise of the logic-based therapy practical syllogism that dictate ratings of particular objects, and the triggers serve as minor premise reports that trigger or activate those rules, thereby leading to particular emotions or behavior. If, as Haidt claims, people can be mistaken in their identification and assessment of particular triggers for particular modules, and these triggers vary from culture to culture and are malleable, logic-based therapy may have a role to play in adjusting these triggers of Haidt's moral foundations/modules in ways that create more public civil discourse and more healthy, pleasant, and productive individual and social lives. So, and I think this is really interesting, this part coming up. But so Haidt demonstrates how his moral foundations theory can be used to understand the different and often competing moral commitments of the major political perspectives in modern Western society. Focusing on the liberal, libertarian, and social conservative perspectives, Haidt claims that the major difference between the three rests on the relative importance that each places on the different moral foundations in its moral matrix. Liberals, Haidt tells us, place primary importance on the care/harm foundation. And you can see like how, like the thicker the line, the more importance the moral matrix places on that particular foundation. So Haidt claims that liberals place primary importance on the care/harm foundation, with secondary importance on the liberty/oppression foundation, fairness/cheating coming in third, and loyalty, betrayal, authority/subversion, and sanctity/degradation barely registering. The most sacred value for the liberal moral matrix is care for victims of oppression. Libertarians, for their part, place primary importance on liberty/oppression. And you can see how thick that line is. I know it's hard to see this, but from liberty/oppression compared to the rest of them. So libertarians place primary importance on liberty/oppression with fairness/cheating, especially in terms of people getting what they deserve or what they earn, a distant second, and the remaining four moral foundations, including care/harm, barely registering. The sacred value for the libertarian moral matrix is individual liberty. In contrast to both liberals and libertarians, Haidt claims that social conservatives value all six moral foundations relatively equally, including what Haidt calls the external socially binding factors of loyalty/betrayal, authority/subversion, and sanctity/degradation. The most sacred value for the social conservative moral matrix is to preserve the institutions and traditions that sustain a moral community. So, and I'm getting to the conclusion, but it's kind of a longer conclusion than most. But although Haidt has long self-identified as a political liberal, he finds himself ultimately favoring social conservatism. He claims that in stressing the importance of the social institutions and traditions, for example, the laws, the customs, the nations and religions, which are embraced by what Haidt calls the external socially binding foundations, that is loyalty/betrayal, authority/subversion, and sanctity/degradation, Haidt claims that social conservatism is able to do what liberalism and libertarianism cannot, and that is to hold societies together. According to Haidt, the liberal and libertarian moral matrices, in ignoring these external socially binding factors, allow for the fragmentation and disintegration of society that can so easily degenerate into the political polarization and fractious condition of our current society. Haidt is aware, I know it's like, what? That was, I was like, what? So, but Haidt is aware that these external socially binding moral foundations, the last loyalty, betrayal, authority, subversion, sanctity, degradation. Haidt is aware that these external socially binding moral foundations also support religious cults and fascist dictatorships. And he insists that more is necessary for a successful society than just the final three external socially binding moral foundations. Haidt is also aware that to the modern Western educated mind, such external socially binding moral foundations sound threatening and even dangerous. After all, wasn't the goal of the Enlightenment to enable individuals to think for themselves, to throw off the chains of authority, religion, and superstition, so that individuals might freely use their own reason? In response to this, Haidt cites historian Jerry Muller, who claims that modern conservatism is operating from within the terms of Enlightenment thinking and not counter to it. Muller identifies Enlightenment thinking as, quote, the search for human happiness based on the use of reason. Haidt contends that social conservatism has identified an essential element for human happiness through the use of reason, and that essential element is the socially binding forces that can hold a society together outside of or beyond the thinking/reasoning of any particular individual. In basically ignoring these socially binding moral foundations, loyalty/betrayal, authority/subversion, and sanctity/degradation, Haidt believes liberals and libertarians have overlooked an essential element of human happiness and have contributed to the deterioration of coherence in our society and the breakdown of civil discourse in these fractious times. In addition to favoring social conservatism for its embrace of the external socially binding moral foundations, Haidt also favors it because in his view it takes into account all 6 of the moral foundations in its moral matrix, as opposed to liberalism and libertarianism, which only take into account 1 or 2 or 3 at the most. Haidt claims that the inclusiveness of social conservatism should enable social conservatives to understand and empathize with the other 2 political perspectives in ways that liberals and libertarians are not able to understand and hence empathize with social conservatism. In spite of his empirical descriptive approach and his fairly consistent downplaying of individual reasoning, Haidt concludes on a prescriptive and reasonable note by stressing the importance of empathy through understanding as a solution to improving the civility of public discourse in these fractious times. Haidt sees the development of empathy as a primary change that will indirectly undermine Manichaeism and its deleterious effects on our society. As Haidt completes the quote from early on in the paper from The Righteous Mind, Haidt says, if you really want to change someone's mind on a moral or political matter, you'll need to see things from that person's angle as well as your own. And if you do truly see it the other person's way, deeply and intuitively, you might even find your mind opening in response. Empathy is an antidote to righteousness, although it's very difficult to empathize across a moral divide. Haidt sees the understanding of the different political perspectives provided by his analysis as a bridge across the moral divide that might contribute to the development of empathy among the adherents of the different political perspectives. Finally, Haidt provides some concrete suggestions for creating understanding and hence empathy among adherents of different political perspectives. A logic-based therapy plan of action, perhaps. Hate calls upon people, both in political office and among the general population, to interact with each other more. That is, to mix and mingle with people of different political perspectives. Hate recalls a time before 1995 when congressional members of both parties would move their families to Washington, D.C. They would attend parties with each other. Their spouses would become friends, and their children would attend the same schools. It was much more difficult for congressional members to treat each other as poorly then as they do now, when most of them leave their families in their home state, fly into Washington for 3 days, do battle with their adversaries, and then fly back home on Thursday night. Hate claims the same phenomenon is occurring in the general population. And this is a quote, "Technology and changing residential patterns have allowed each of us to isolate ourselves within cocoons of like-minded individuals. Our counties and towns are becoming increasingly segregated into lifestyle enclaves in which ways of voting, eating, working, and worshiping are increasingly aligned." According to Haidt, indirectly attacking Manichaeism requires intermingling among people of different political perspectives. More positive interactions, more pleasant experiences with each other, and better relationships are the key to understanding where those who disagree with us are coming from. Logic-based therapy is definitely up for the task of promoting empathy, the guiding virtue that corresponds to the fallacy of the world revolves around me thinking. Hopefully empathy will lead to respect and empowerment of others. And one day we might even be able to ask, why does the fact that someone disagrees with me mean that we are in a combat situation? That's all. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.